Back for our final episode in our five-part series. Today, I'm thrilled to have with me Taylor Edwards. Taylor, could you first of all welcome and thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Taylor, could you tell us what your current role at Broadcat is?
Yeah, I am the director of sales over here. So I'm working with groups that have not yet worked with us and need some educating on what we do and how we offer it, how we work with groups, things like that.
So, Taylor, we've entitled this episode, Are You Overwhelmed Yet? And we've gone through a lot of information in this podcast series. And I was really excited to visit with you today because not only we're going to sort of tie things up in a bow, but we're going to answer that question of are you overwhelmed with, well, we're going to answer it with the response that here's how you go through the steps. So I was wondering if you might be able to start with how do you suggest to clients or how do you help clients sort of unpack their program so that they can begin to see maybe what they're doing right and areas where remediation or enhancements might be appropriate?
Yeah, you bet. And frankly, I was excited to get this one as well because, in full transparency, I've had conversations with compliance teams in the past where we walk them through, Broadcat's approach to training and communications, and sometimes the feedback we get is, man, this is really great, but we're just not ready for this yet. We're just not quite at the stage where we could tackle this yet. Um, and oftentimes our response is, well, is the DOJ gonna are they gonna find that to be an acceptable answer? That you just didn't feel ready to start doing what you felt was the right thing. So yeah, but when we come across situations like that and helping groups implement some of what has been talked about in some of these previous episodes, it's the idea of taking an honest assessment of where the program is today. And honest, I think, is the crucial word there in the sense that we've got to be okay with the fact that no program is perfect, and thus when you take that, when you have that assessment of your program, you're going to find things that need to change, and that's not an indictment towards you or the work that you've done. It's just a simple fact of the matter that we don't exist in a vacuum, and things will continue to evolve and ebb and flow, and so I think that's the first part is taking a look at the data and your current state, and then having an honest assessment as a team of, okay, what do we think needs to change? What are the things that we can improve on?
So I grew up in Houston professionally, and Enron was the major scandal in my corporate career. And the response around Enron was, well, we've always done it that way. Well, hopefully in the last 20 years, people have learned that's not the right answer. And number one, you can't let your past define you. But if you do what you've done, you'll get what you've got. So, how do you help people understand that, yes, your history is important, but it's also important to maybe uh, look forward, be innovative, and bring new ways to engage employees through some of the strategies and tactics that Broadcat uses?
Yeah. Well, for one thing, I think continuing to come back to some of those household examples like Enron certainly doesn't hurt to remind people of the, that's just natural human behavior is to do things the way we've always done them, right? To some extent. So certainly reminding them of that helps. I think in addition to that, pointing people towards these resources, like for instance, these memos, helps to reinforce that as well, to say, hey, this wouldn't continue to be talked about if it wasn't still something that needs to be changed throughout the discipline or the practice. um and so as we try and surface, certainly we can talk all day long about it, but we're just one vendor of many in this space, and working with compliance teams. But as we surface some of these memos and some of those real world examples, I think that helps to kick some things into gear for folks. Um, and then showing success stories. It's great when we can point to organizations that have made some changes, and we can point to business outcomes that come from it, right? And that's just frankly one of the things that we're always trying to point groups towards is focus on business outcomes, not some of these vanity metrics that sometimes we can get caught up in. And so I think that's a really helpful way as well to show that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. You can see differences, you can see results that come from this, but it takes some time and it takes some of that preliminary work, of course, as well on the front end.
So Taylor, I've known Broadcat literally since it was founded, and kind of looking in from the outside, Broadcat was always one of the most innovative vendors in this space. And that innovation did not necessarily mean high tech, because it could be a visual innovation.
Yeah.
And when you guys started, that was innovative in our space. But to me, it was always about employee engagement, or my software engineer wife would say the user experience. And so when you have those conversations with compliance teams or compliance officers or compliance professionals, and they say, well, we're really not ready yet, do they understand really what that employee engagement or even that user experience, how powerful that can be for getting your message out, even if they don't think they are ready for that type of message?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the short, maybe playful answer is simply, if they did understand it, then maybe they wouldn't give me that response from time to time. But more than that, I think, I'll maybe double click on something that you're saying there. I mean, one of the reasons why I joined the organization and have stayed here is because of that innovation you're describing. So much so now we believe innovation is all tech, 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 tech. It's all platforms. It's new software. It's new systems that we can just load data into, and it can do all the work for us. But when we're trying to change individual behavior, then like mass produce software to nudge everybody or to train everybody simply isn't the right tool for that. And so I've really grown to love this idea that innovation, it can be beyond technology. It can be behavioral innovation and process or operational innovation that Ricardo early on, and the team even before I joined, helped to bring to the market. And so, yeah, I think what would help groups see that impact and see the user experience is by better understanding the day-to-day life of employees that live outside of compliance and legal. And this was something that early on, I know Ricardo had me talk a fair amount about when I first joined, because my background was not in ethics and compliance and legal. My background was as a salesperson selling for one of the largest organizations in the world, but technology. And I couldn't understate, or how would I put it? I could not overstate how little I thought about compliance in my day to day, because I'm worried about hitting my quota, and I'm worried about connecting with the next person that I need to connect with in order to hit my number and things like that. And that's the case for the vast majority of employees who don't live and breathe this stuff all day. And so, my perspective is that when compliance teams have a better understanding of what is on the minds of employees who typically are high risk or are the risks that they're trying to mitigate, when they understand what's on their minds on a day-to-day basis, then they recognize that, oh, okay, this one and done training module is going to go in one ear and out the other. And this code of conduct is never going to get opened, right? Or whatever it is that they're trying to send out. And so then by contrast, when they look at content that can be implemented just in time, it can be operationalized, it can be kind of built into this greater design of the ethics and compliance program, then I think that's when lights click for people to say, oh, this is what these employees need, because they're not spending much of their time, if any at all, thinking about ethics and compliance. For the most part, they're thinking about these other responsibilities they have so they can protect their jobs, so they can be high performers, so that they can hit their numbers, so they can do all of those things that people want in their jobs and their careers.
Taylor, one of the messages I've tried to get out for years is that even if your program needs enhancement, it needs remediation, it needs updating, the Department of Justice does not expect you to do it all at once. It expects you to assess your risks, rank your risks, and then move down that risk ranking in a manageable, efficient, business efficient format. So I try to counsel compliance clients that let's get going on something and we'll move through it. And that the key is you have determined what needs fixing or remediating or enhancing, and then you're moving forward to do it. And then you're going to test on it after you put it in place. Does that message resonate when you try to talk to compliance professionals, that don't be overwhelmed by the entirety of everything? It's manageable bite-sized amounts, figuring out what you need to do, then doing it. And if and when a regulator comes knocking, you have documentation of all of that.
Yeah, it resonates in a big way. We're really appreciative when you and other kind of leaders in the space provide that type of guidance to groups, and it's similar to the feedback we give, calling back once again to that conversation we'll have from time to time where groups will say, we're just not ready. And the response is, okay, well, you don't have to do it all right now, but at least get started. Because to your point, then you've got this kind of, you've snapped a line and a chalk line. You said, okay, this is the point at which we're making some of these changes. And yes, they're going to be incremental, and yes, they're going to be bite-sized. But if we just don't even try to address it at all, because we're not ready, and we want to do it all perfectly at one time, well, that's the adage, perfection is the enemy of progress, right? And so it certainly resonates with us, and it's similar to the feedback we'll give groups to say, hey, don't do it all at once. Do it, in manageable chunks, but at least get started, because you're going to get credit for that. That's going to work in your favor, like you said, if and when you end up sitting across the table from a prosecutor.
To even drive it home to as tactical a level as you can get, I had a CCO friend that, taking that approach, would write down every day something he had done to improve his program. And when he went in for his annual salary negotiation, and they said, "What have you done?" He had every business day he had something on his diary, and it could have been one line or 3 words. But having that documentation really allowed him to have that conversation with management, not simply about his salary, but about the resources needed for compliance. And that, he felt, really helped him garner both monetary resources and additional headcount when appropriate. So the taking of action, and anyone who's ever heard me talk knows my mantra is the 3 most important things in compliance are the following: document, document, document. Whatever you do, document it. I wanted to maybe get your concluding thoughts on the documentation part, and using that to move towards the next step after you've improved, which is, or rather, monitoring your improvement and then going into a continuous improvement cycle.
Yeah. I mean, my thoughts on that are really, what we're talking about is different terms to talk about the same thing, in the sense that we've talked a lot about data, right? There is no data without that documentation, right? That in and of itself, that's how we're collecting it and tracking it. And so if we ultimately want to, if we're moving to this world where we're going to be make data-driven decisions about things and be more analytical about the data that we have, then we've got to, stuff has got to be written down. It's got to be documented. And so as we do that, and maybe the other point I'd make on that front would just be that there's no one right way, I think, for a lot of that documentation, in the sense that sometimes we think that has to live in a particular system or in a particular platform within the larger tech stack of the organization. And there might be some cases where some of that makes more sense in one system or another. But generally speaking, you can collect it and you can track it and you can monitor it in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different formats, and potentially a lot of different systems. But the important is you've got to document. It's got to get down on paper so that you can move forward from there. You can't move anywhere if you don't know where you are, and you're not gonna reasonably remember where you are without writing anything down.
Well, Taylor, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode, but I was wondering if our listeners wanted any more information on any of the topics we've touched on today, what would be the best place for them to go?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably not a surprise. I'd have people head over to our website, thebroadcat.com. Additionally, I post really regularly and engage with other folks in this space on LinkedIn. So you can always find me on there, Taylor Edwards, or other members of the team that you've heard in previous episodes as well.
Well, Taylor, I wanted to thank you again. I really appreciated you batting cleanup, although it was fifth, because I think we tied together a lot of different strands that we put forward in this podcast series. So I look forward to continuing this conversation.